Don't eat it. I screamed, lunging across the dining table, my hand outstretched toward my husband. Too late. Jake had already swallowed the first bite of the chocolate mousse his mother had brought over, the dessert I'd been suspicious of since it arrived in our home. His confused eyes met mine as the room fell silent, his mother's smile faltering at my outburst. "Ellie, what's wrong with you?" Jake asked, setting down his spoon with an awkward laugh. My voice caught, doubt suddenly flooding through me. Had I imagined the strange shimmer in the dessert? The slightly bitter almond scent that shouldn't have been there? The way his mother had insisted we try it immediately, watching Jake with those calculating eyes? "Really, Eleanor," my mother-in-law Margaret huffed, her perfectly manicured hand pressing against her chest in exaggerated offense. "If you didn't want dessert, you could have simply said so. No need for theatrics." I looked down at the untouched mousse in front of me, then back at Jake, who was now finishing his portion. The moment of crisis seemed to have passed. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the stress of the past few months, the unexplained hospital visits, Jake's deteriorating health, the strange test results, had finally broken something in my mind. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, sinking back into my chair. "I thought I saw something in it." 43 minutes later, Jake was on the floor, convulsing. "Jake!" I screamed, kneeling beside him as foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway of our kitchen, her face a mask of shock I couldn't read as genuine or performed. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "My husband, he can't breathe, he's having a seizure, please hurry." The next hours blurred into a nightmare of ambulance sirens, emergency room lights, and doctors asking questions I couldn't fully process. Margaret wept dramatically in the waiting room, drawing sympathetic glances from nurses, while I sat numb and silent, replaying the moment I'd screamed at Jake not to eat the dessert. Why hadn't I been more insistent? Why had I doubted myself? "Mrs. Parker?" I looked up to find Dr. Reeves, Jake's primary physician, standing before me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, a mixture of concern and something darker. More alarming. "How is he? Can I see him?" I asked, rising unsteadily to my feet. "Your husband is stable, but I need to speak with you privately," he said, glancing pointedly at Margaret. In a small consultation room, Dr. Reeves closed the door and turned to me with grim determination. "Mrs. Parker, we've run a comprehensive toxicology screen on your husband, given his symptoms and the information you provided about the sudden onset." "And?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "We found extremely elevated levels of thallium in his system." Thallium, Mrs. Parker, is a highly toxic heavy metal. At these levels, it should have killed him. "Thallium?" I whispered, the word unfamiliar and terrifying. "From the dessert?" Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "Here's what's most concerning, the levels we're seeing aren't consistent with a single exposure. The tests show chronic thallium poisoning over what appears to be months. It would explain his hair loss, the peripheral neuropathy, the gastrointestinal issues, all the symptoms that have baffled us for the past year." The room seemed to tilt sideways as understanding crashed over me. Someone's been poisoning my husband. Deliberately. 4 months. "I've already contacted the police," Dr. Reeves confirmed grimly. "They'll want to speak with you, and with everyone who has had regular access to your husband's food and drink." My mind flashed to Margaret, her insistence on bringing meals when Jake first started feeling ill, her constant presence in our home, the way she'd watch him eat with those hawkish eyes. My mother-in-law. The woman who had never approved of me. The woman who had lost her husband 3 years ago and had clung to Jake, her only son, with suffocating devotion ever since. The woman who had just tried to kill him in front of me. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Reeves added, his voice dropping lower. "While examining Jake, we found evidence of another substance in his system, one that doesn't appear in any standard medical database." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that whatever has been happening to your husband goes beyond simple poisoning. The lab is still working to identify the compound, but preliminary results suggest it may be experimental." something that shouldn't exist outside of classified research facilities. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, if you want to save Jake, don't trust anyone at the hospital. They're part of it. Evidence in the basement storage unit. Code 051219. I looked up at Dr. Reeves, suddenly uncertain whether I could trust even him. What had I stumbled into? And how deep did this conspiracy go? Mrs. Parker? Dr. Reeves frowned. Are you all right? I need to see my husband, I said, rising on unsteady legs. Now. Jake was barely recognizable beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. His once vibrant face had grown gaunt over the past months, but seeing him in the hospital bed, skin gray, cheekbones jutting sharply, made my heart splinter. This brilliant, laughing man I'd fallen in love with 5 years ago now fought for his life because someone had been methodically poisoning him. And I had missed every sign. We'd met at Berkeley, where I was finishing my PhD in biochemistry while Jake was a rising star in the university's advanced robotics lab. Our worlds collided at a faculty mixer. He spilled wine on my presentation notes, spent the next hour helping me reconstruct my data, then asked me to dinner with that crooked smile that still made my heart skip. You're the first scientist I've met who talks about molecules like they're old friends, he teased that night. I fell hard for his brilliant mind, his easy laughter, and the way he made complex engineering concepts sound like poetry. Within a year, we were married, a small ceremony on the Northern California coast, much to Margaret's dismay. Such a rushed affair, she'd sniffed at our reception. Jake deserves a proper wedding, with proper planning. It was my first glimpse of what would become a pattern. Nothing I did was ever quite right for Margaret Parker, widow of the legendary Dr. William Parker, whose patents in medical devices had built Parker Innovations into a biotech empire now controlled by his son. In Margaret's eyes, Jake had married beneath his station, a mere research scientist with no family connections or impressive lineage. She'll come around, Jake had assured me, kissing my forehead. Mom just needs time. Dad's death hit her hard. But 3 years into our marriage, Margaret hadn't come around. If anything, her disapproval had calcified into something more active, more deliberate. She'd drop by our home unannounced, rearrange my kitchen because Jake prefers things organized the way he grew up with, and constantly remind me of family traditions I was somehow failing to uphold. Then came the company crisis. 8 months ago, Parker Innovations' newest neural interface device, Jake's passion project, failed during clinical trials. 3 participants suffered seizures, 1 died. The company's stock plummeted, and though initial investigations pointed to manufacturing errors rather than design flaws, Jake took it personally. I should have caught it, he'd repeated night after night, poring over data until dawn. Someone missed something fundamental in the interface design. That's when his health began to decline, subtly at first, then with alarming speed. Stomach pains. Inexplicable nerve sensations in his extremities. Fatigue that sleep couldn't touch. And that's when Margaret inserted herself more firmly into our lives. A mother knows what her son needs, she declared, appearing at our door with homemade meals 3 times a week. You're too busy with your research to properly care for him, Eleanor. I bristled but didn't argue, partly because Jake seemed to take comfort in his mother's attention, and partly because I was spending every free moment researching his symptoms, convinced we were missing something the doctors couldn't see. That's what I did, after all. I found patterns in molecular chaos. I identified anomalies in biological systems. I solved puzzles others missed. But this puzzle had eluded me, until tonight. Jake, I whispered, taking his limp hand in mine. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. I'm going to figure this out. I promise. A soft knock at the door made me turn. Detective Samuels entered, a tall woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Parker? I need to ask you some questions about tonight's events. I glanced back at Jake, reluctant to leave him. It won't take long, she assured me. And officers are stationed outside your husband's room. No one unauthorized will enter. In a small conference room, I recounted everything, the months of mysterious illness, Margaret's constant presence, the dessert, my suspicion, Jake's collapse. And you believe your mother-in-law is responsible? Detective Samuels asked, making notes. I don't have proof beyond tonight, but yes. She's had the most access to his food and drink over the months he's been sick. What about enemies through his company? Parker Innovations deals with cutting-edge technology. Competitors, disgruntled employees? I hesitated. The neural interface failure created some tension with investors, but Jake isn't directly involved in the business side. He's the innovator, not the CEO. And you? Her gaze sharpened. Dr. Reeves mentioned you're a biochemist. Could your work have exposed your husband to dangerous substances? My stomach tightened. I work with cellular therapies for autoimmune diseases. Nothing involving heavy metals or experimental compounds. Detective Samuels nodded, then surprised me with her next question. Do you recognize the number that sent you this text? She showed me the message on my phone that I'd received in Dr. Reeves' office. I shook my head. We'll trace it, she assured me. In the meantime, have you checked this storage unit it mentions? Not yet. I came straight to Jake. We'll send officers to investigate. She handed me her card. Don't go there alone, Mrs. Parker. If there's evidence of a crime, we need to process it properly. When Detective Samuels left, I returned to Jake's room. Margaret had somehow gained access despite the officers. She sat by his bed, stroking his hair with a tenderness that seemed obscenely false now. The doctors say it was some kind of poisoning, she said, her voice quavering with what sounded like genuine shock. Who would do such a thing? I stared at her, unable to reconcile the grieving mother before me with the woman I suspected of slowly killing her own son. I don't know, Margaret. Who would? Her eyes narrowed slightly at my tone. What are you implying, Eleanor? Before I could respond, Dr. Reeves entered with a tablet in hand. We have more test results, he announced, glancing between us. Mrs. Parker, Eleanor, could I speak with you privately again? Margaret stood, smoothing her expensive slacks. Whatever you need to tell my daughter-in-law, you can tell me as well. I'm Jake's mother and his medical proxy. Actually, I interjected, I'm his medical proxy. We updated the paperwork last year. A flash of something, anger? Frustration, crossed Margaret's face before her mask of concern returned. Of course, dear. I just want what's best for my son. Dr. Reeves looked uncomfortable. Perhaps you could both step outside? In the hallway, he lowered his voice. The lab identified the unknown compound in Jake's blood work. It's a synthetic peptide that doesn't match anything in medical literature. What does it do? I asked. We're not entirely sure, but it appears to bind to neural receptors in ways similar to the interface your husband's company was developing. He hesitated. There's something else. I requested Jake's previous medical records, and there are irregularities dating back 6 months, blood tests ordered that I didn't authorize, tissue samples taken during routine procedures that weren't documented properly. My mind raced. Someone's been using Jake as a test subject. For what? I don't know. But given the connection to his company's technology. Dr. Reeves trailed off. Margaret watched our whispered conversation with barely concealed impatience. What is it? What did you find? As Dr. Reeves explained the thallium poisoning again, carefully omitting the synthetic peptide, I noticed Margaret's hand drift to her purse, fingers tightening around something inside. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Don't let her leave the hospital. Check her purse. I looked up to find Margaret watching me, her eyes calculating behind her mask of maternal concern. Eleanor, you look exhausted. Why don't you go home and rest? I'll stay with Jake tonight. No, I said firmly. I'm not leaving him. Margaret's smile tightened. Don't be ridiculous. You can barely keep your eyes open. I insist. As she stepped toward me, her purse swung open slightly, and I caught a glimpse inside, a small vial with clear liquid, similar to the 4 bags hanging beside Jake's bed. In that moment, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. Margaret was indeed trying to kill her own son, and this went far beyond a possessive mother eliminating an unwanted daughter-in-law from the equation. This was something much bigger, something connected to Parker Innovations, to the failed neural interface, to whatever was in that storage unit the mysterious text had mentioned. And I was the only one who could unravel it before Jake became the next casualty of whatever sinister plan was unfolding around us. "What's in your purse, Margaret?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The hallway seemed to freeze as Margaret's smile calcified. Dr. Reeves looked between us, confused by the sudden tension. "Excuse me?" Margaret's hand tightened around her purse. "The vial," I pressed. "The one you're clutching right now." "What is it?" Dr. Reeves stepped forward. "Mrs. Parker." "It's a sedative," Margaret cut him off smoothly. "For myself. The stress of seeing Jake like this, my doctor prescribed it." She turned to Dr. Reeves with practiced vulnerability. "Could I have a moment alone with my daughter-in-law? Family matters." To my disbelief, he nodded and stepped away. The moment he was out of earshot, Margaret's expression hardened. "You've always been too clever for your own good, Eleanor. That's why Jake was drawn to you, that brilliant mind." She sighed, almost regretfully. "But you should have gone home when I suggested it." "You've been poisoning him," I stated flatly. "Your own son." "Why?" Margaret glanced around the empty hallway before leaning closer. "You think this is about you? About some petty dislike of my son's wife?" She almost laughed. "This is so much bigger than your little domestic drama." "Then tell me why," I demanded. "Jake's neural interface is revolutionary, it just needed refinement. Refinement that required specialized testing." Her eyes flicked toward Jake's room. "Testing that conventional ethics boards would never approve." Horror bloomed in my chest. "You've been experimenting on your own son? With thallium?" "The thallium was necessary to create the neurological conditions for the peptide to bond correctly," she explained with clinical detachment. "William theorized it years ago, but Jake would never have approved the testing protocols. He's always been squeamish about experimental parameters." "William, Jake's father. The company founder who died 3 years ago. The trial failure wasn't a manufacturing error," I realized aloud. "The interface design is fundamentally flawed." Something dangerous flashed in Margaret's eyes. "The design is perfect. The preparation protocol wasn't followed correctly. William's research proved the neural tissue needs to be properly conditioned with trace metals before the interface can integrate." "You're insane," I whispered. "You're killing him." "I'm saving his legacy," she hissed. "And the company that bears our name. Parker Innovations will revolutionize neural technology, just as William intended before cancer took him too soon." A nurse approached, and Margaret immediately transformed back into the concerned mother, dabbing at non-existent tears. The performance was chilling in its seamlessness. "I should check on my son," she murmured, moving toward Jake's room. I grabbed her arm. "I'm calling security." "With what evidence?" She smiled thinly. "A vial of what I say is prescribed medication. Your wild accusations about a grieving mother?" She extracted herself from my grip. "Besides, do you really think I came alone?" My blood froze as I spotted a man in a lab coat I didn't recognize entering Jake's room. He wasn't hospital staff, his badge showed the Parker Innovations logo. I lunged past Margaret toward Jake's room, but she caught my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't make a scene, Eleanor," she warned. "Parker Innovations has considerable influence in this hospital. Board members. Major donors. People who understand the greater good of what we're accomplishing." I broke free and ran toward Jake's room, only to find 2 security guards blocking the entrance, neither wearing hospital uniforms. "Mrs. Parker needs to rest," one said firmly. "Dr. Reeves has approved specialized care for Mr. Parker through his company's medical team." "That's not true." I looked wildly around for Dr. Reeves, for Detective Samuels, for anyone who might help, but the hallway had emptied except for Margaret and what were clearly her people. "This is a private medical matter now, Eleanor," Margaret said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Jake's condition requires specialized care that only Parker Innovations can provide. I've arranged for transfer to our private facility." "You can't do this," I protested. "I'm his medical proxy." "A detail that's being addressed," she replied calmly. "Given your emotional state and questionable judgment tonight, the hospital ethics committee is reviewing that arrangement." I was being outmaneuvered at every turn. Margaret wasn't just a jealous mother-in-law, she was a powerful corporate executive with resources and connections I'd never fully appreciated. As if reading my thoughts, she leaned close. "Go home, Eleanor. Get some rest. You can visit Jake at our facility tomorrow once he's stabilized." "If you take him, I'm going straight to the police," I threatened. Margaret's smile never wavered. "Detective Samuels has already been apprised of the situation. Parker Innovations is cooperating fully with the investigation into Jake's poisoning. In fact, we've provided several promising leads about disgruntled former employees with access to laboratory chemicals." She was framing someone else, perhaps even setting me up to take the fall. "Now," Margaret continued pleasantly, "I've arranged for someone to drive you home. You're in no condition to drive yourself." A large man in a suit approached, clearly security rather than medical personnel. "Mrs. Parker? Your car is ready." I had seconds to decide. If I stayed and fought, I'd be removed from the hospital, possibly sedated myself if Margaret's influence was as extensive as she claimed. If I appeared to comply, I might have a chance to outmaneuver her. The storage unit. The evidence. The text message. "Fine," I said, feigning defeat. "I'll go home." Margaret's triumph flickered across her face before her mask of concern returned. "That's best, dear. We'll take good care of Jake." As the security guard escorted me out, I glanced back to see Margaret entering Jake's room with the man in the lab coat. Whatever they were planning, I had hours at most before Jake would be beyond my reach, transferred to a private facility where Margaret could continue her monstrous experiments unobserved. In the parking garage, I slipped away from my escort, ducking between cars until I reached my own. The code from the text message burned in my mind: 051219. May 12, 2019. Our wedding day. Whatever waited in that storage unit, it was meant for me to find. And it might be Jake's only hope for survival. Rain lashed against my windshield as I navigated downtown streets, constantly checking my rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The storage facility, a nondescript building near the university, appeared abandoned at this late hour. My hands shook as I punched in the gate code from memory: 051219. The lock clicked open. Someone had expected me to remember our wedding date. Unit 23 waited at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Another keypad, same code. Inside, I found a space barely larger than a closet, containing a single metal filing cabinet and a laptop. The cabinet drawers held what appeared to be William Parker's personal research notes, hundreds of pages of handwritten observations dating back 15 years, long before his supposed death from pancreatic cancer. I flipped through them frantically, searching for anything related to neural interfaces or thallium. What I found chilled me to the bone. Project Prometheus, Human AI Neural Integration Protocol. Subject 0, William Parker, Self. Secondary subjects, JP, Primary, MP, Control. The notes detailed William Parker's obsessive quest to create true human-machine neural integration, not just an interface for medical applications as publicly claimed, but a pathway to what he called transference of consciousness. He had been experimenting on himself first, then on Jake, with Margaret as a control subject. Most disturbing were the clinical observations of Jake's conditioning, beginning in childhood. February 2001, JP, age 12, showing promising neural plasticity after initial low-dose exposure. Cognitive testing reveals 15% increase in pattern recognition. M, concerned about symptoms but reassured this is necessary preparation. And later. November 2008, JP's college performance validates early conditioning protocols. Neural scans show unprecedented receptor development in areas targeted for interface. M has fully embraced the necessity of our work. She understands what most cannot, personal sacrifice for transcendent achievement. I felt physically ill. Jake's brilliant mind, which I had fallen in love with, had been deliberately engineered through controlled poisoning since childhood. His own father had experimented on him for decades. And Margaret hadn't just allowed it, she had become a willing participant. The laptop powered on automatically when I opened it. A video file was queued up, dated 3 years ago, just before William's supposed death. William Parker's gaunt face filled the screen, his eyes fever-bright. If you're watching this, something has gone wrong with the final phase. Margaret has instructions to secure this evidence if Jake shows signs of rejection. He continued with clinical detachment. The neural interface prototype requires specific conditions to integrate successfully. The thallium protocol I developed creates the necessary receptor sensitivity, but the final integration requires precise timing. If Jake experiences systemic rejection as I did, the emergency protocol must be initiated immediately. William leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. The synthetase compound in the vault at Parker Labs can reverse the conditioning damage. Margaret knows this, but she may be reluctant. She's fully committed to our work, perhaps too committed since my diagnosis. She believes the small sacrifice of one life is acceptable for what we'll achieve. My hands trembled as I processed his words. William hadn't died of cancer, he'd died from his own experiment. And now Margaret was continuing that work on Jake, willing to sacrifice her son for what she saw as revolutionary technology. But why now? What had triggered the acceleration of their protocol? I found the answer in William's final research entries. Integration success requires neural conditioning and genetic compatibility. My rejection occurred because the genetic markers weren't optimized. JP shows perfect compatibility, but the next generation would be ideal. Any child of JP would likely possess superior integration capacity due to generational conditioning. My blood ran cold as I remembered Margaret's increasing hostility when Jake and I had mentioned starting a family last year. She wasn't just possessive, she was protecting her experiment. If Jake and I had children, those children would be prime candidates for whatever horrific integration William had envisioned. My phone rang, Detective Samuels. Mrs. Parker, where are you? The hospital reported you left against medical advice. I hesitated. Could I trust her? I found evidence about what's happening to Jake. His mother is continuing experiments that William Parker started years ago. What kind of experiments? Her tone sharpened. Neural interface technology. They've been conditioning Jake's brain with thallium since he was a child. I struggled to keep my voice steady. They're planning to move him to a private facility tonight. Stay where you are. I'm sending officers to your location. No, I said firmly. I need to get to Parker Innovations first. There's an antidote compound in their secure vault that can reverse the poisoning. That's not advisable, Mrs. Parker. If what you're saying is true. I don't have time to wait for warrants and proper channels, I interrupted. Jake will die or suffer permanent brain damage if I don't get that compound tonight. After hanging up, I gathered the most damning evidence and headed for my car. As I reached the exit, headlights swept across the parking lot. A black SUV pulled up, blocking my path. 2 men in suits emerged. Dr. Eleanor Parker, one called. Mrs. Parker sent us to find you. She's concerned about your mental state. I backed away, clutching the laptop and files. Stay away from me. We're just here to help, the second man said, advancing slowly. Your husband needs you. We can take you to him. A lie. Margaret would never allow me near Jake now that I knew the truth. I sprinted toward the side of the building, finding a service exit that led to an alley. Behind me, I heard their footsteps and urgent radio communications. Subject is fleeing on foot. West side of the building. My car was inaccessible, my phone likely being tracked. I had evidence of a decades-long criminal conspiracy but no safe way to get it to authorities. And Jake was being moved to a facility where Margaret would complete whatever monstrous procedure William had begun. I ducked into an all-night diner and borrowed a phone from a startled waitress. There was only one person I could call, someone who might understand the neuroscience involved and had the clearance to access Parker Innovations, Dr. Amara Chen, Jake's research partner. "Amara, it's Ellie," I whispered when she answered. "Don't react to my name. I need your help. Jake's life depends on it." "I'm listening," she replied cautiously. "Meet me at our usual place in 30 minutes. Come alone, tell no one. And if you have access to the secure vault at Parker Labs, I need you to bring something called the synthetase compound." "That's highly restricted," she said, her voice dropping. "How do you even know about?" "Jake is dying because of it," I cut her off. "Margaret has been poisoning him as part of William's neural conditioning protocol." "Silence, then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I left the diner, my phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. "They've moved Jake. Accelerated timeline. Neural integration procedure scheduled for midnight at Parker Private Facility. 4 hours remaining." The message included coordinates for a location outside the city, an unmarked research facility where Margaret would complete what William had started. Where my husband would either die or become something no longer fully human. The rain had intensified, matching the storm of fear and determination building inside me. I had 4 hours to infiltrate one of the most secure private research facilities in the country, locate an experimental compound I couldn't identify, and somehow administer it to Jake before Margaret completed her grotesque experiment. And Margaret's people were hunting me every step of the way. The rain had subsided to a drizzle when I arrived at Nexus Cafe, the quiet university hangout where Jake, Amara, and I had spent countless hours discussing research breakthroughs over coffee. It felt like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been months since our last visit. Amara was already waiting in our usual corner booth, 2 steaming mugs on the table. Despite the late hour, she looked impeccable, her crisp blazer and perfect posture a stark contrast to my rain-soaked, disheveled appearance. "My God, Ellie," she whispered as I slid into the booth. "What happened to you?" I placed William's research notes and the laptop between us. "Did you bring it? The synthetase compound?" Amara nodded, patting her bag. "It wasn't easy. I had to override 3 security protocols." Her eyes darted to the documents. "Is that what I think it is?" "William Parker's private research. He's been experimenting on Jake since childhood, neural conditioning with thallium to prepare his brain for some kind of integration procedure." I pushed the notes toward her. "And Margaret has been continuing the protocol, increasing the dosage over the past months." Amara flipped through the pages with scientific detachment that seemed oddly inappropriate given the horror they contained. Her finger traced William's notations with something like, "recognition." "You don't seem surprised," I said slowly, a chill creeping up my spine. "The theoretical work is brilliant," she murmured, still reading. "William was decades ahead of anyone in the field." "Brilliant?" I echoed, incredulous. "Amara, he experimented on his own child. He poisoned Jake for years. And now Margaret is trying to finish what he started." Amara finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "What exactly do you think they're trying to accomplish, Ellie?" "Some kind of neural interface, human-AI integration. William called it transference of consciousness." A slight smile touched Amara's lips. "That's a simplistic description of the most revolutionary technology ever conceived." The air seemed to thin around me as realization dawned. "You knew." "Not everything," she admitted, closing the folder. "The details of the conditioning protocol were kept from the research team. We knew Jake had undergone specialized preparation, but not the specific methods." My hand instinctively moved to my bag, ready to grab the evidence and run. "You're part of this. Part of the most significant leap in human evolution?" "Yes." Amara's professional facade dissolved into zealous intensity. "Do you understand what William accomplished? He found a way to map human consciousness onto a quantum neural network, to transcend biological limitations entirely. He died, I pointed out sharply. His body died, she corrected. But his consciousness, most of it, anyway, was preserved within the prototype network. Horror washed over me in cold waves. That's what this is about? You're trying to resurrect William Parker? Not just resurrect. Complete his work. Amara leaned forward. The transfer was only partial. William needs a compatible neural structure to achieve full integration, a bridge between biological consciousness and digital existence. Jake, I whispered. His own son. Amara nodded. Jake's brain has been carefully conditioned for this role since childhood. The neural architecture is perfect. You're talking about killing him. I slammed my hand on the table, drawing startled glances from the few late-night patrons. Transformation, not death, Amara corrected, her voice still eerily calm. Jake's consciousness will merge with William's in the quantum network. Father and son achieving immortality together. And Margaret? How could a mother sacrifice her own child? Something flickered in Amara's eyes, pity, perhaps. Margaret lost the love of her life. William promised they would be reunited through the technology. Jake is the key to bringing his father back and ensuring the Parker legacy continues forever. I felt physically ill. The neural interface trials that failed. Necessary data points, Amara dismissed. We needed to understand how unconditioned neural tissue would respond to integration. The results confirmed William's theory: only properly prepared neural structures can achieve successful transference. Those were people, Amara. One of them died. She waved this away as irrelevant. Margaret accelerated the timeline when she discovered you and Jake were planning to start a family. Your children would inherit aspects of Jake's conditioned neural structure, potentially diluting it. We couldn't risk losing our only viable host. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The anonymous texts. The storage unit. That was you, wasn't it? Trying to manipulate me into finding the evidence. Amara's smile was cold. We needed you distracted while we moved Jake. Your predictable determination to save him made you the perfect unwitting assistant. And the synthetase compound? I'm guessing that doesn't exist either. She reached into her bag and removed a small vial of clear liquid. Oh, it exists. William developed it as a failsafe. It can indeed reverse the neural conditioning. But we can't allow that to happen. As she spoke, I noticed two men enter the cafe, the same suits from the storage facility. They positioned themselves near the exit, trying to appear casual but clearly watching our table. Margaret was impressed by your deduction skills, Amara continued. She thought you might eventually piece things together, but not this quickly. Your biochemistry background proved more relevant than we anticipated. My mind raced for escape options. The back exit through the kitchen was my only chance, but I'd need a distraction. What happens to me now? I asked, stalling. You'll be taken to a secure location until the integration is complete. After that. Amara shrugged. Margaret believes you could be valuable to the research team, given your expertise. Under proper supervision, of course. And if I refuse? That's not an option, Ellie. Amara gestured subtly to the men by the door. The integration happens tonight, with or without your cooperation. As one of the men approached our table, I made my move, grabbing the laptop and knocking over Amara's coffee cup in the same motion. As she jerked back from the spilling liquid, I lunged past her toward the kitchen. Stop her. Amara shouted. I burst through the kitchen doors, startling the night cook. Fire exit? I gasped. He pointed wordlessly to a back door. I slammed through it into an alley, the sound of pursuit close behind. The service corridor led to a parking garage where students worked late. A security guard looked up in alarm as I sprinted past. Miss? Are you all right? Men chasing me, I managed between breaths. Please, call police. His distraction bought me precious seconds. I ducked between parked cars, desperate for any escape route. My phone buzzed, another text from Amara, dropping all pretense. You're only delaying the inevitable. The integration begins in 3 hours. By dawn, Jake Parker as you knew him will cease to exist. William will live again. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Amara had been our friend, a trusted colleague who'd celebrated our wedding, who'd comforted me during Jake's mysterious illness. All while knowing, participating, in the horror being inflicted on him. And I had walked directly into her trap, wasting precious time we didn't have. The synthetase compound was real but still locked in Parker Innovations' secure vault. Jake was being prepared for a procedure that would essentially kill him to resurrect his father's consciousness. And the only people who could help me were either complicit or unable to act quickly enough. I was completely alone. The university parking garage offered temporary shelter, but I knew it wouldn't last. Parker Innovations' security team would have the exits covered within minutes. I needed a plan, transportation, and most critically, help. I tried Detective Samuels again, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "Detective, please," I pleaded when she answered. "I have proof now, William Parker's research notes, video testimony. They're going to kill Jake tonight. Mrs. Parker, we've been looking for you." Hospital security reported a disturbance. That was Margaret's people. They're everywhere, police, hospital, Parker Innovations. William Parker has been experimenting on Jake since childhood, and now they want to use him for some kind of consciousness transfer experiment. The silence on the line stretched too long. When Samuel spoke again, her voice had changed subtly. "Where are you now, Mrs. Parker? I'd like to see this evidence." A chill ran through me. "You don't believe me." "I didn't say that. But these are extraordinary claims against one of the city's most respected families. If you could come to the station. By the time we go through proper channels, Jake will be dead," I cut her off. Or worse, his mind merged with his father's in some grotesque experiment. "Mrs. Parker, Eleanor," her tone shifted to what I recognized as crisis de-escalation. "You've been under tremendous strain. Your husband's illness, the poisoning discovery, it's natural to look for explanations. They'd gotten to her too, or more likely, she simply couldn't conceive of the horror I was describing. Either way, official help wasn't coming. I ended the call and crouched between 2 parked cars, trying to control my panicked breathing. The garage security cameras would give away my position soon. I needed transportation and a way to infiltrate Parker's private facility with less than 3 hours remaining. My academic ID granted me access to the university's research buildings. In desperate inspiration, I made my way to the biochemistry department, using service corridors to avoid detection. My old lab was dark and empty at this hour. Using my still-active keycard, I slipped inside and headed straight for the secure chemical storage. If I couldn't get the synthetase compound from Parker Innovations, perhaps I could synthesize something similar based on William's notes. But as I reviewed his formulas under the harsh fluorescent light, despair washed over me. The compound was far too complex to recreate quickly, requiring specialized equipment and precursors I couldn't access. I slumped against the lab bench, exhaustion and hopelessness finally overtaking me. My phone showed 10:47 p.m. Just over 2 hours until the integration procedure began. With shaking hands, I opened our photo gallery, images of Jake and me in happier times. Our honeymoon in Greece. Hiking in Yosemite last spring. His birthday party 3 months ago, before the poisoning symptoms became severe. In the last photo, taken just weeks ago, his thinning hair and gaunt face showed the toll of the thallium, but his eyes still held that spark of brilliant intellect and warmth that had drawn me to him from the beginning. Eyes that might soon be vacant, or worse, animated by his father's consciousness instead of his own. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to break down completely. Sobs tore through my body as I clutched the phone to my chest. I had failed him. After months of watching him suffer, of searching for answers, I'd finally discovered the horrific truth, only to find myself powerless to stop it. "Jake," I whispered to the empty lab. "I'm so sorry." The sound of the lab door opening jolted me back to awareness. I scrambled beneath a desk, holding my breath as footsteps approached. Dr. Parker? Eleanor? It's me. I recognized the voice, Dr. Liu, one of our department's research assistants who often worked late. I'd completely forgotten she had access to the lab. Min? I emerged cautiously. Her eyes widened at my appearance. My God, what happened to you? Campus security is searching for someone who matched your description. They're saying something about a disturbance. In that moment, I made a split-second decision. Min wasn't just a colleague, she'd been a dinner guest in our home, had worked with me on several projects. If I couldn't trust her, I couldn't trust anyone. Min, I need your help. My husband is in danger, serious danger. And I need transportation to reach him. To her credit, she didn't immediately call security. What kind of danger? I showed her William Parker's research notes and briefly explained the situation. Her scientific training helped her grasp the implications quickly, horror dawning on her face as she read. This is monstrous, she whispered. Neural conditioning through thallium poisoning? Consciousness transference? She looked up. If this is real. It is. And they're completing the procedure tonight at Parker's private research facility. I showed her the coordinates. I have less than 2 hours to stop it. Min hesitated only briefly before reaching into her pocket. My car's in the faculty lot. Take my keys. Relief washed through me. Thank you. But they'll be watching for me. I know a service exit that bypasses the main security gates. She pointed to a campus map on the wall. And I can create a diversion. Make it look like you went toward the main library instead. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a final text from Amara, integration preparation complete. Final neural mapping underway. You've lost, Ellie. Attached was a photo of Jake, unconscious on an operating table, his head fitted with an elaborate neural interface prototype, wires and electrodes embedded directly into his exposed brain tissue. Margaret stood beside him, dressed in surgical scrubs, her expression one of scientific detachment as she prepared to sacrifice her son. The image unleashed something primal inside me, rage and determination crystallizing into perfect clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my husband anymore. I was fighting against a fundamental violation of humanity itself. Min, I said, turning to her with newfound resolve. I need one more thing. Access to your research samples. The experimental neurotransmitter blockers? She frowned. They're nowhere near ready for human application. I know. But combined with what I can derive from William's formula, they might be our only chance to interrupt the neural mapping before integration is complete. It was a desperate gamble, potentially as dangerous as what Margaret was attempting. But as we rushed to gather the compounds, I knew it was Jake's only hope. 40 minutes later, I was driving toward the coordinates, a makeshift lab kit in the passenger seat containing our hastily prepared counteragent. No official help was coming. No cavalry to the rescue. Just me, armed with biochemistry knowledge, desperate determination, and nothing left to lose. The Parker private research facility loomed ahead, a sleek, isolated compound surrounded by electrified fencing and security cameras. Getting inside would be nearly impossible. Nearly. But as William Parker himself had noted in his research, the most secure systems always contain one vulnerability, the human element. And I knew exactly which human might be my way in. Parker Innovations' private research facility resembled a fortress more than a laboratory, 3 stories of gleaming steel and glass surrounded by a 10-foot electrified fence. Security guards patrolled the perimeter while cameras monitored every approach. Frontal assault was impossible. But I wasn't planning to force my way in. I parked Min's car a half-mile away and approached on foot through the surrounding woods. From my vantage point behind a maintenance shed, I studied the employee entrance where staff scientists were still arriving despite the late hour. Each used a keycard and underwent retinal scanning. I had neither, but I did have knowledge of one critical vulnerability. Dr. Howard Jenkins exited his car in the parking lot, looking harried as he gathered research materials. Howard, a neurologist who'd worked closely with Jake on the interface project, was notoriously forgetful about security protocols. Jake had often joked about having to remind Howard to activate his alarm system or lock his office. More importantly, Howard had been infatuated with me since we'd met at a university fundraiser 3 years ago. Jake found it amusing, I found it awkward but harmless. Now, it might be Jake's only chance. I dialed Howard's number, watching him juggle his coffee and briefcase to answer. "Eleanor?" He sounded shocked. "Where are you?" "There are security alerts." "Howard, I need your help," I cut in, my voice deliberately breaking. "It's about Jake. I've discovered something terrible about his condition." "You shouldn't contact me," he whispered, glancing around nervously. "Management has flagged you as unstable, potentially dangerous. Do you trust them more than your own eyes, Howard? More than your scientific integrity?" I pressed. "They're not treating Jake. They're using him for William's consciousness transfer experiment." His visible flinch told me he knew something. "That's classified research." "So it does exist," I confirmed. "Howard, they're going to effectively kill Jake tonight. His consciousness will be overwritten by Williams. You know that's not science, it's murder." Doubt flickered across his face even from my distant vantage point. "The integration theory is sound. Theory, Howard. Not proven science. And they're rushing it because I discovered the truth." I softened my voice. "You've always cared about me. About us. Please, just meet me at the maintenance entrance. 5 minutes. If you don't believe me after seeing the evidence, I'll leave." His hesitation was agony. Finally, he nodded slightly. 5 minutes. The west maintenance door. But if security spots you. They won't. Thank you, Howard. The west entrance was less monitored, a service door used primarily by maintenance staff. Howard appeared 7 minutes later, nervously checking his surroundings before unlocking it with his keycard. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered as I slipped inside. "Margaret has authorized security to use whatever force necessary if you're spotted. Because she knows I can stop this." I showed him the photo Amara had sent, Jake on the operating table, neural interface penetrating his exposed brain. Howard paled. "My God. The integration prototype isn't approved for human testing. The neural mapping alone could cause catastrophic brain damage. It's scheduled for midnight. Where would they be doing this?" "Sub-basement 3. The quantum computing lab." Howard looked genuinely conflicted now. "Eleanor, even if you reach Jake, what can you do? The procedure is already underway. Interrupting neural mapping during integration could leave him brain dead. I produced the vial of counteragent Min and I had created. This might disrupt the integration process without damaging Jake's neural tissue. But I need to administer it directly into his foreline." Howard examined the formula, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his caution. "This is brilliant theoretically, but completely untested. It could kill him. And what Margaret is doing will destroy his consciousness permanently," I countered. "I've made my choice." Howard handed back the vial with shaking hands. "You realize what you're asking me to do? If I help you, my career is over. Possibly my freedom too. And if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you allowed a man to be murdered for scientific ambition." I met his gaze steadily. "Can you live with that, Howard?" The moment stretched between us, his career, reputation, and safety balanced against his scientific ethics and whatever feelings he harbored for me. "The emergency stairwell isn't monitored between floors," he finally said, handing me his keycard. "Security is concentrated on the main lab level. Take the service elevator to SB2, then use the stairs for the final descent. I'll create a distraction in the main monitoring center." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." His expression turned grave. "There's something else you should know. The integration isn't just about transferring William's consciousness to Jake. What do you mean? The quantum network where William's consciousness exists, it's unstable, degrading. This isn't just about bringing William back. It's about saving what's left of him before the network collapse erases him completely. Howard's eyes held genuine fear. Margaret is desperate. And desperate people take unconscionable risks. As if confirming his words, the facility's lights flickered momentarily, a power surge from the massive energy requirements of the quantum computing lab. Go, Howard urged. I'll buy you as much time as I can. As Howard headed toward the security center, I faced the service elevator that would take me to the sub-basement levels. The counteragent in my pocket represented an impossible choice, an untested, potentially lethal compound versus the certainty of Jake's consciousness being erased. I had no way to know if my hasty formulation would work or kill him instantly. But doing nothing meant losing Jake forever. With 1 minute until midnight, I made my choice and stepped into the elevator. The service elevator descended into the heart of Parker Innovation's most classified research. With each floor, the lighting grew more sterile, the air more charged with the hum of powerful equipment. Howard's keycard granted me access to sub-basement 2, where I immediately located the emergency stairwell. My watch read 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the scheduled integration. Sub-basement 3 was unlike anything I'd seen in my scientific career, a cavernous space dominated by a quantum computing array that pulsed with blue-white light. The enormous machine resembled a metallic cathedral, its cooling systems releasing clouds of vapor that swirled around its base. And at its center, on an elevated platform, was Jake. He lay unconscious on an operating table, his head encased in the neural interface prototype, far more advanced than the public version that had failed in clinical trials. Electrodes penetrated his exposed skull, connecting his brain directly to the quantum array. Multiple 4 lines fed into his arms, delivering what I assumed were neural accelerants and stabilizing compounds. Margaret stood beside him in surgical scrubs, adjusting settings on a monitoring console. Amara worked at another station, her back to me. 3 technicians monitored various aspects of the procedure, all focused intently on their tasks. None had noticed me yet. A large display screen dominated the wall behind them, showing brain activity patterns alongside what appeared to be a digital consciousness signature, a swirling, complex matrix of light points that somehow conveyed sentience. William Parker's digitized mind. Neural mapping at 78% completion, a technician announced. Quantum coherence stabilizing. Excellent, Margaret replied, her voice clinically detached. Begin final synchronization sequence. I needed to reach Jake's 4-line without being detected, an impossible task with so many people surrounding him. But as I hesitated in the shadows, an alarm blared from the upper levels. Security breach in the main monitoring center, a voice announced over the intercom. All non-essential personnel report to containment positions. Howard had created his distraction. 2 of the technicians immediately headed for the exit, hurrying past my hiding place without noticing me. Continue the procedure, Margaret ordered Amara and the remaining technician. We can't interrupt the neural mapping at this stage. The quantum array suddenly surged with power, its light intensifying as the facility's main lights dimmed in response. On the display screen, William's consciousness pattern began pulsing rhythmically, reaching tendrils toward the representation of Jake's neural map. It was happening. The integration had begun. I clutched the vial of counteragent, knowing I had seconds to act. As Margaret and Amara focused on the surging quantum array, I slipped from my hiding place and darted toward Jake's unconscious form. Integration commencing, the technician announced. Estimated completion in 3 minutes. I reached Jake's side and was momentarily paralyzed by the sight of him, his beloved face gaunt and pale, his skull partially exposed beneath the neural interface equipment. This brilliant, gentle man who had loved me completely was about to be erased, his mind overwritten by his father's megalomaniacal consciousness. My hands shook as I uncapped the vial and reached for his foreport. Stop her. Margaret's voice shattered the moment. She lunged toward me, but I'd already inserted the counteragent into Jake's 4-line. No, she screamed, grabbing my arm and yanking me away. Do you have any idea what you've done? Saved my husband from being murdered by his own mother, I shot back, twisting free of her grip. The technician moved to restrain me, but a second alarm blared, this one from the quantum array itself. Neural coherence destabilizing, Amara called out, frantically adjusting controls. The host consciousness is rejecting synchronization. On the display, Jake's neural pattern was pulsing erratically, pushing back against William's digital consciousness. The counteragent was working, disrupting the integration process. You fool. Margaret shoved me aside, rushing back to the controls. William's consciousness can't survive another transfer attempt. You're killing him all over again. He's already dead, I countered, standing my ground. Jake is still alive, and I won't let you sacrifice him. Margaret's face contorted with grief and rage. William found the key to immortality. His consciousness has been trapped in that degrading network for 3 years, waiting for the right host. Jake was prepared his entire life for this moment. You mean poisoned, I corrected. Experimented on without his knowledge or consent. Your own son, Margaret. A sacrifice for a greater purpose, she cried. William's genius is irreplaceable. His work will transform humanity. The quantum array surged again, consoles sparking as power fluctuations rocked the facility. The neural interface connected to Jake began to overheat, wisps of smoke rising from its connections. Margaret, we need to abort, Amara urged, her scientific detachment cracking in the face of catastrophic system failure. The coherence field is collapsing. Margaret ignored her, focused on the display where William's consciousness pattern was starting to fragment. Increase neural accelerance. Force the synchronization. That could kill Jake. I protested, moving to block her. Neural tissue damage escalating, the technician reported nervously. Sir, we need to. Sir? I echoed, suddenly noticing how the technician deferred to Margaret with a traditionally male honorific. And then I understood. It's not just William in the quantum network, is it? I asked, staring at Margaret with dawning horror. It's you too. At least part of you. Margaret's expression confirmed my theory before she spoke. A test transfer. 2 years ago. My consciousness split, part here in my biological body, part joined with William in the quantum realm. Her eyes took on a faraway look. We've been together there, Eleanor. United in ways your limited biological mind couldn't comprehend. And you want to be fully reunited, even at the cost of your son's life, I realized. That's why you've been so desperate to complete this procedure before the network degrades completely. William and I will live forever through our creation, she declared. Jake would understand the necessity of his sacrifice if he truly comprehended what we're achieving. On the operating table, Jake's body began to convulse, the neural interface smoking more heavily now. He's seizing. I pushed past Margaret toward Jake. We need to disconnect him now. Don't touch him. Margaret grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray, brandishing it threateningly. William's consciousness is still transferring. If you interrupt now, both could be lost. The display showed the truth. William's digital pattern was indeed flowing into Jake's neural map, but Jake's consciousness was fighting back, creating chaotic interference patterns that threatened both minds. Amara stepped back from her console, face pale. It's failing, Margaret. The rejection is too strong. We need to terminate before permanent damage. No. Margaret turned the scalpel toward Amara. Increase the suppression field. Force Jake's consciousness into dormancy. As they argued, I noticed something remarkable on the neural display. Jake's pattern wasn't just rejecting William's. It was absorbing fragments, integrating them on his own terms. My counteragent hadn't completely blocked the transfer. It had altered it, allowing Jake's consciousness to remain dominant while selectively incorporating aspects of William's knowledge. Jake was fighting back. And he was winning. The quantum array suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine. Sparks erupted from multiple connection points as the power grid struggled to compensate for the massive energy fluctuations. Quantum coherence field collapsing. Amara shouted, backing toward the exit. We need to evacuate immediately. No. Margaret cried, dropping the scalpel and rushing to the controls. William. Stay with me. On the display, William's consciousness pattern was disintegrating, fragments scattering as the quantum network destabilized. The part of Margaret that existed in the network was fracturing as well, digital tendrils desperately reaching toward Jake's neural pattern. I seized the moment to dart to Jake's side, frantically working to disconnect the neural interface equipment. His vital signs were dangerously unstable, his brain activity spiking erratically. What are you doing? Margaret screamed, abandoning the controls to lunge at me. You're destroying everything we've worked for. I'm saving my husband, I shot back, continuing to disconnect electrodes despite her efforts to stop me. The remaining technician had fled, and Amara hesitated at the exit, clearly torn between self-preservation and scientific loyalty. Margaret, it's over, she called. The quantum coherence can't be maintained. William's consciousness is fragmenting beyond recovery. Margaret's face contorted with grief and madness. Then we all go together, she whispered, reaching for the main power coupling to the neural interface, a move that would flood Jake's brain with a lethal surge of energy. I tackled her away from the controls, both of us crashing to the floor as the quantum array began an automated shutdown sequence, its lights flickering wildly. Neural integration aborted, an automated voice announced. Emergency protocols engaged. Margaret lay beside me, suddenly still, her eyes fixed on the display where the last fragments of William's digital consciousness were dispersing into static. William, she whispered. I failed you. Then her body went rigid, eyes rolling back as she began to convulse, experiencing the same seizure pattern as Jake. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. The part of Margaret's consciousness that had existed in the quantum network was gone, leaving her biological brain unable to function with only a partial mind. As facility security finally breached the lab, I returned to Jake's side, continuing to carefully remove the neural interface equipment as medical personnel rushed in. His neural patterns are stabilizing, one of the emergency technicians announced with surprise. It's like his brain is reorganizing itself. Jake's eyelids fluttered, and for one terrible moment, I feared William's consciousness had succeeded in taking control. When those eyes finally opened, I held my breath. Ellie? Jake whispered, his voice weak but unmistakably his own. What happened? I saw my father. In my mind. I collapsed against him in relief, tears flowing freely as I realized the truth. Jake was still Jake. The integration had failed, or perhaps succeeded in a way William and Margaret had never intended. Jake had absorbed fragments of his father's knowledge without surrendering his own consciousness. He had taken control of the very process designed to erase him. And in doing so, he had finally broken free from the experiment that had controlled his entire life. 6 months after that night in the quantum lab, Jake and I sat on our porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. His recovery had been arduous, weeks of neural rehabilitation, countless tests, and nightmares that still occasionally woke him screaming. But the man beside me was undeniably my husband, his consciousness intact despite what Margaret and William had tried to do. Another memory surfaced today, Jake said quietly, his fingers laced through mine. From when I was 14. Dad took me to the lake house, supposedly for fishing. Instead, he spent the weekend running cognitive tests after giving me what he called vitamin supplements. I squeezed his hand. I'm sorry. The strange part is remembering it from both perspectives now. My confusion as a child, and his clinical detachment as he documented my reactions. Jake shook his head. The fragments of his consciousness that integrated with mine, they're like having access to another person's memories, but through a broken mirror. The neural integration hadn't failed completely. Instead, it had inverted. Jake's consciousness remained dominant while selectively absorbing portions of William's knowledge and memories. The unique interaction with my counteragent had created something unprecedented in neuroscience. Any regrets about the company? I asked. Jake smiled faintly. Turning Parker Innovations into a non-profit research foundation was the only ethical choice. The neural interface technology had too much potential for abuse. The scandal had rocked the scientific community. Margaret remained in a specialized neurological facility, her fragmented consciousness unable to fully reconstitute after the quantum network collapse. Amara and several other Parker scientists faced criminal charges for unethical human experimentation. Detective Samuels had personally apologized for doubting me after the evidence became irrefutable. Howard Jenkins had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, his career redirected toward establishing ethical guidelines for neural interface research. Dr. Chen called, I mentioned, watching Jake's reaction carefully. The Neural Rehabilitation Center wants you to consult on their new therapy protocols. Using my unique perspective as both victim and unwitting researcher. Jake's tone was wry but not bitter. No one understands the implications better than you do, I pointed out. The fragments of your father's knowledge could help develop interfaces that genuinely help people without risk of consciousness manipulation. Jake gazed at the horizon thoughtfully. That would be fitting, wouldn't it? Using William's obsession to heal rather than control. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled around us. The poisoning had left its mark. Jake would always deal with some peripheral nerve damage, and occasional cognitive processing issues when tired. But the essential person, his soul, if you believe in such things, remained wonderfully, miraculously intact. I found something else in William's research notes, I said finally. Something about genetic markers that made you especially receptive to the neural conditioning. Jake turned to me, understanding dawning in his eyes. Our children would inherit those markers. I nodded. Any child we have might be vulnerable to similar experimentation. The neural architecture would be there, waiting to be exploited. Or, Jake countered, our children would inherit the capacity for unprecedented neural integration with technology, integration on their own terms, not as unwilling hosts for someone else's consciousness. He placed his hand gently on my stomach, where our first child, just 8 weeks along, was growing. We'll protect them in ways I wasn't protected. And we'll teach them that their minds are their own, never vessels for someone else's ambition. The choice to start our family hadn't been made lightly. The genetic risks were real. But so was our determination to reclaim Jake's legacy from William's twisted vision. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, I thought about consciousness, how fragile and yet how resilient it can be. How the essence of who we are can withstand even the most calculated attempts to erase it. How love can be the anchor that holds our true selves in place when everything else is in chaos. Sometimes, the people closest to us harbor the darkest secrets. Sometimes, the family legacies we inherit are stained with unimaginable crimes. But in the end, we choose which parts to carry forward and which parts to leave behind. Jake and I had chosen life. Our life. Together. And nothing, not thallium, not quantum networks, not the ghosts of brilliant, obsessed minds, would take that from us again.